hardly be disputed that failure to note specific instances of telekinesis during the White girl's earlier years must be attributed to the conclusion offered by White and Stearns in their paper, Telekinesis, A Wild Talent Revisited, that the ability to move objects by effort of the will alone comes to the fore only in moments of extreme personal stress. The talent is well hidden, indeed. How else could it have remained submerged for centuries, with only the tip of the iceberg showing above a sea of quackery? We have only skimpy hearsay evidence upon which to lay our foundation in this case, but even this is enough to indicate that a TK potential of immense magnitude existed within Carrie White. Both medical and psychological writers on the subject are in agreement that Carrie White's exceptionally late and traumatic commencement of the menstrual cycle might well have provided the triggers for her latent talent. It seems incredible that, as late as 1979, Carrie knew nothing of the mature woman's monthly cycle. It is nearly as incredible to believe that the girl's mother would permit her daughter to reach the age of nearly 17 without consulting a gynecologist concerning the daughter's failure to menstruate. Carrie White was simply innocent of the entire concept of menstruation. One of her surviving classmates, Ruth Gogan, tells of entering the girls' locker room at Ewan High School the year before the events we are concerned with and seeing Carrie White using a tampon to blot her lipstick with. At the time, Miss Gogan said, "What the hell are you up to?" Miss White replied, "Isn't this right?" Miss Gogan then replied, Sure it is." Ruth Gogan led a number of her girlfriends in one of this. She later told the interviewers she thought it was a sorta cute, and if anyone tried in the future to inform Carrie of the true purpose of what she was using to make up with, she apparently dismissed the explanation as an attempt to pull her leg. This was a facet of her life that she had become exceedingly wary of. Carrie White's mother, Margaret White, gave birth to her daughter on September 21st, 1963, under circumstances which can only be deemed as bizarre. In fact, an overview of Carrie White's case leaves the careful student with one feeling, ascendant over all others, that Carrie was the only issue of family as odd as any that has ever been brought to popular attention. As noted earlier, Ralph White died in February of 1963 when a steel grinder fell out of a carrying sling on a housing project job in Portland. Mrs. White continued to live alone in the suburban bungalow. Due to the Whites' near-fanatical, fundamentalist religious beliefs, Mrs. White had no friends to see her through her period of bereavement, and when her labor began 7 months later, she was alone. At approximately 1:30 p.m. on September 21st, the neighbors on Carlin Street began to hear her screams from the White bungalow. The police, however, were not summoned to the scene until after 6 p.m. We are left with two unappetizing alternatives to explain the time lag. Either Mrs. White's neighbors on the street did not wish to become involved in a police investigation, or dislike for her had become so strong that they deliberately adopted a wait-and-see attitude. Mrs. Georgia McLaughlin, the only one of the three remaining residents who were on the street at the time and who would talk to me, said that she did not call the police because she thought the screams had something to do with Holy Roland. When the police did arrive at 6:22 p.m., the screams had become irregular. Mrs. White was found in the bed upstairs, and investigating officer Thomas G. Merton at first thought she had been a victim of assault. The bed was drenched with blood, and a butcher knife lay on the floor. It was only then that he saw the baby, still partially wrapped in the placental membrane, at Mrs. White's breast. She had apparently cut the umbilical cord herself with the knife. It staggers both imagination and belief to advance the hypothesis that Mrs. Margaret White did not know she was pregnant, or even understand what the word entails, and recent scholars such as J.W. Binkson and George Fielding have made a more reasonable case for the hypothesis that the concept linked irrevocably in her mind with the sin of intercourse has been blocked entirely from her mind. She may simply have refused to believe that such a thing could happen to her. We have records of at least 3 letters to a friend in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that seem to prove the conclusion that Mrs. White believed from her 5th month on that she had a cancer of the womanly parts and would soon join her husband in heaven.
True sorrow is as rare as true love. She did not know if her gift came from the Lord of Light or of darkness, and now, finally finding that she didn't care which, she was overcome with almost indescribable relief, as if a huge weight long carried had slipped from her shoulders. And then the world exploded. She knew with suddenness and ease that this moment would be with her always, within hand's reach of memory. She doubted if they all sensed it. They had seen the world, but even George was silent for a minute as they looked, and the scene, the smell, even the sound of the band playing a faintly recognizable movie theme was locked forever in her, and she was at peace. But hardly anybody ever finds out that their actions really actually hurt other people. People don't get better, they just get smarter. When you get smarter, you don't stop pulling the wings off flies. You just think of better reasons for doing it. They were still all beautiful, and there was still enchantment and wonder. But she had crossed a line, and now the fairy tale was green with corruption and evil. And suddenly it didn't seem to matter anymore. Nothing would matter if she could turn over and see the stars, turn over and look once and die. Mind over matter in any form is a terrific drain on the body's resources. Nobody was really surprised when it happened. Not really. Not on the subconscious level, where savage things grow. This is the girl they keep calling a monster. I want you to keep that firmly in mind. The girl who could be satisfied with a hamburger and a dime root beer after her only school dance, so her mama wouldn't be worried. Telekinesis is the ability to move objects or to cause changes to objects by the force of the mind. She was still uncomfortable about her own motives and afraid to examine them too deeply. High school isn't a very important place. When you're going, you think it's a big deal, and when it's over, nobody really thinks it was great unless they reared up. The spectacular incident of the stone serves as kind of a red herring in this respect. Many researchers have adopted an amorous belief that where there has been one incident, there must be others. To offer another analogy, this is like dispatching a crew of meteor watchers to Crater National Park because a huge asteroid struck there 2 million years ago. In the wake of 200 deaths of the destruction of an entire town, it is so easy to forge one thing. We were kids. We were kids. We were kids trying to do our best. What happens if there are others like her? What happens to the world? Wanting and hating and fearing and misery, as if life itself had fallen on stones, all at the age of 3. On the subject of Carrie White, we're all relatively uninformed. But sin never dies. Sin never dies. What none of them knew, of course, was that Carrie White was telekinetic. It was either laugh or cry, and who could bring themselves to cry over Carrie after all those years? I look at the photos, and all I can think is, dear God, where did she go? What did that woman do to her? Then I feel sick and sorry. She was so pretty with pink cheeks and bright brown eyes, and her Sweet is the only word that fits, sweet and bright and innocent. Her mother's sickness hadn't touched her very deeply, not then. Jesus watches from the wall, but his face is cold as stone, and if he loves me, as she tells me, why do I feel all alone? She reached over, turned off the light, and lay back. No pillow. Mama didn't allow her a pillow. She thought of imps and families and witches. Am I a witch, Mama? The devil's whore. It was a huge and awful grin, a Cheshire cat grin, floating dreamily in the fire-shot darkness, like a trace of memory of lunacy. You don't have to be a hero to do heroic things. The explosion destroyed nearly half a block at a stroke, including the offices of the Chamberlain Clarion by 12:18 a.m. Chamberlain was cut off from the country that slept in reason beyond. At 16, the elusive stamp of hurt was already